प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम्।
असतो मा सत्कमया तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमया मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय आविराविर्मयेति रुद्रयत्ते दक्षिणं मुखं तेन मां पाहि नित्यम्. May the divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So today I would like to begin with verse number 18 in chapter 4. So let's read that verse first and then see what it has to teach us. Karmanya karmayah pashyet akarmani cha karmayah sabuddhiman manushyeshu sayuktav kritsna karma krite. He who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is intelligent among men. He is a yogi and a doer of all actions. There's a lot to explore and understand in this verse. This is one of the verses that Swami Vivekananda quotes often and often. The idea about seeing action in inaction and inaction in action. And let us first take a look at how Swami Vivekananda translates this. And I just have just 2 or 3 passages which I would like to read to you. And then we will see how vital this particular verse is in our day-to-day life. So these are Swami Vivekananda's words. The Bhagavad Gita is the best commentary we have on the Vedanta philosophy. Curiously enough, the scene is laid on the battlefield, while Krishna teaches this philosophy to Arjuna. And this doctrine, which stands out luminously in every page of the Gita, is intense activity, but in the midst of it, eternal calmness. So what we saw in that verse about action in inaction and inaction in action, this is how Swamiji phrases it. Intense activity, but in the midst of it, eternal calmness. And then he says, this is the secret of work, to attain which is the goal of Vedanta. It's significant that what this verse states, Swamiji says, that is the goal of Vedanta. Let me read you something more. There arises a difficult question in this ideal of work. Intense activity is necessary. We must always work. We cannot live a minute without work. What then becomes of rest? Here is one side of the life struggle. Work, in which we are whirled rapidly round. And here is the other, that of calm, retiring renunciation. Everything is peaceful around. There is very little of noise and show. Only nature with her animals and flowers and mountains. Neither of them is a perfect picture. A man used to solitude, if brought in contact with the surging whirlpool of the world, will be crushed by it. Just as the fish that lives in the deep sea water, as soon as it is brought to the surface, breaks into pieces, deprived of the weight of water on it that had kept it together. Can a man who has been used to the turmoil and the rush of life live at ease if he comes to a quiet place? he suffers and perchance may lose his mind. The ideal man is he who, in the midst of the greatest silence and solitude, finds the intensest activity, and in the midst of the intensest activity, finds the silence and solitude of the desert. He has learnt the secret of restraint. He has controlled himself. He goes through the streets of a big city with all its traffic, and his mind is as calm as if he were in a cave, where not a sound could reach him, and he is intensely working all the time. That is the ideal of Karma Yoga. And if you have attained to that, you have really learnt the secret of work. So again and again, this idea of finding peace and silence in our activity, and even when we are peaceful and silent, we are intensely working all the time. And if we can somehow do both these things at the same time, we have reached the goal of Vedanta. How often many of us have thought, when we are burdened with work, burdened with deadlines, burdened with things to attend to, and says, oh, only if I had a peaceful moment. I'm just tired of commuting to work every day, tired of just going around surrounded by crowds. I want to be calm and peaceful. And now, today, because of the pandemic, most of us don't have to commute. We are at home, not surrounded by any big crowd other than our only family. And while it seemed kind of nice in the beginning, but now that we have no idea how long this situation is going to continue, people have started becoming restless. The relative calm and peace and time away from the crowds is becoming unbearable. And people are dying to get out. So that's the dilemma of life. When we are busy with work, we long for silence and rest. And we have given a lot of silence and rest, and we just are dying to get out and get busy again. So this verse therefore becomes very relevant to us, especially in the times in which we live. So here's one other passage I want to read before we go back to the verse again. When we come to that non-attachment, then we can understand the marvelous mystery of the universe, how it is intense activity and vibration, and at the same time intensest peace and calm, how it is work every moment and rest every moment. That is the mystery of the universe, the impersonal and personal in one, the infinite and finite in one. Then we shall find the secret. And he quotes the verse again now. He who finds in the midst of intense activity the greatest rest, and in the midst of the greatest rest, intense activity, he has become a yogi. He alone is a real worker, none else. We do a little work and break ourselves. Why? We become attached to that work. If we do not become attached, side by side with it, we have infinite rest. So let's go back and read that verse once again, keeping in mind these words of Swami Vivekananda. Karmani akarma yav pashyet, akarmani cha karma yaha. One who sees karma, activity, in akarma, in inactivity, and one who sees inactivity, such a person is wise. Now, on the face of it, superficially, this verse really makes no sense. It doesn't make sense because what is the sign of wisdom? What is the sign of knowledge? That I see things as they are. So if there is activity, I must see and recognize that there is activity. If I see inactivity, I must see and recognize it as inactivity. And that would be what seeing things correctly means. But this word says, no, just the opposite. If I see activity and then see there an inactivity, if I see action and see there is no action, then I'm seeing things correctly. Or if I see there is no action somewhere and I see that is where the action is, then I'm seeing things clearly. So how do we understand this? As I said, if you take it literally, it really doesn't make sense. So one example that is often given, Shankaracharya in his commentary on these words, he gives the example of a person sitting in a boat and rowing. But we can as well use the example of just sitting in any vehicle. You could be sitting in a train or a car, any moving vehicle. So let's say that I'm sitting in a train. Now when I'm going in a train, I know I'm sitting in a train and the train starts and the train is moving. Now I look out of the window. And if my train is moving in this direction, when I look out of the window, everything I see outside is moving in the opposite direction. The trees and people and buildings, they are going in the opposite direction. Now, as adults, as people who understand, people who know, we know that the things that we see outside the window are not moving, but it is we who are moving. But let's say there's some tiny little kid sitting alongside us and who looks out and says, oh, look at how the way the trees are running backward, how everything is moving outside. And then, of course, you can instruct the child and say, no, that's not it. We are the ones who are moving, and those things are stationary. Now, that's a very simple example and might also seem also very obvious. But now that we apply it in our own life, we will see that we are no better than a little baby in understanding where the movement really is. All the work that we do in life, there is clearly movement involved in every action. There is physical movement. If I'm reading a book, there is movement. I'm picking up the book in my hand, holding it, reading it. The stuff that is happening, and there is a physical movement. And therefore, because there is movement, I say, I'm reading a book. I can say, I go out jogging. I go and run. I go and walk. Now, from a Vedantic perspective, we can ask the question, when I say that I just had a long walk, or I walked and came, or I ran, or I did some weightlifting, whatever things that I did, who is it that really did all those things? And one answer is, well, I did them. But if we analyze that, well, okay, you did it, okay, but who exactly did it? And then we say, well, really, if I have done some weightlifting, it was these hands that lifted the thing. If I went running, it were these legs that were running and the feet I used which made running or walking possible. So the movement was in my body. Now, when I say, therefore, I was the one who was running, I'm really saying I am this body. Same thing with regard to movement of the mind. Now, movement of the body is a little bit more tangible and easier to understand. But thinking, feeling, all of these things that are occurring internally in the mind is a movement of the mind. And yet, I don't say my mind is thinking. It just sounds odd. That's not how even language develops. You say, I am the one who is thinking. So, the movement that is occurring in the body, the movement that is occurring in the mind, I am transferring that movement onto me. Well, I am this infinite spirit, the Atman, which doesn't move. So there is no movement in the Atman, and all the movement occurs in the body and mind. So if I'll be wise, I'll be considered wise if I see where the movement truly is. And so when this verse says seeing action in inaction and inaction in action, what it means is what children is a metaphorical usage that it often finds in text, like ignorant people, when they attribute movement to the self, saying, I ran, I walked, I did this. So the movement of the body and mind is transferred onto the movement of the self. Just as the movement of the train is transferred onto the things that are seen through the window. And the opposite occurs, that the thing that is actually stationary, the Atman, is seen to be doing things, and the things that are actually moving and doing things, we don't consider their movement at all. So that is the meaning of this verse. Karmani akarmayah pashyet akarmani cha karmayah. He who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is intelligent. Now, this understanding has a great implication in the life of a karma yogi. Right now, our life is compartmentalized into times that we work and at times that we rest. That's why we speak about working hours. Now, usually when we use the word working hours, we are using it in a very limited sense. Even the meaning of work is very limited in some ways. So when we ask someone, what do you do? Clearly we are not wanting to know. Then the person will say, well, I brush my teeth in the morning, I take a shower, and I eat. Well, that's also doing. But when we ask someone, what do you do? We are not asking for those kind of actions. We usually mean, what job do you work on? What do you do to earn your livelihood? So it's good to remember when we speak about action here, it's not just about what job that we are doing. We're just speaking about every activity that is occurring within me. And because our notion of work is often gotten limited to the work that we do to earn our livelihood, what we then divide or compartmentalize our life into saying, well, that's work, and then the rest of the time is what I think is a restful time. The reason people, why do people say TGIF? Well, there could be many reasons why the phrase came, but one of the reasons clearly is that these weekdays from Monday through Friday is my working days. But while weekends for most people seem to be, those belong to me. I can do whatever I want. If the weekdays are days of work, then in contrast to that, the weekends are the times of rest. Now, oftentimes, weekends may not be as restful as we think. Maybe many of us probably do more work on weekends than we do during the weekdays. But because we have a choice about what to do or what not to do, that seems more restful than the rest of the week, where oftentimes, whether we like it or not, we have to work a certain number of hours. Whether we like it or not, we have to do certain kinds of work which may not be to our taste. And so that becomes work. So right now, our life has gotten divided into times of work and times of rest. And as we saw in the beginning, that while we are working, we long for the times of rest. And while we are resting, we are not able to rest that time much at all, because ideas and thoughts and memories related to work come and disturb that rest. So we are not able to rest. Nor are we able to work properly, because during work, we are thinking about what will I do next weekend? When will I go for my vacation? And so neither the work nor the rest we are able to accomplish perfectly, because during work we are thinking of rest, during rest we are thinking of work. And the problem is that the two have gotten separated. What this verse points out is there a way I can experience them simultaneously? And that is what Swamiji in the quotes that I read in the beginning was saying. Can I find rest when I'm intensely working? And can I be intensely working when I'm completely at rest? And the only way that is possible is to look within our own personality and see what parts of my personality are really active and what part of me is at rest. Now, all of you are familiar with the basic worldview and the basic structure of our personality that Vedanta presents us. That there is something in our personality which is unchanging, which is eternal, which is birthless and deathless, which always exists, which is not affected by any external circumstance. And that is the spirit, the Atman. And that Atman is covered by a body and a mind. The body and the mind are material. They evolve, they change, and they are the ones who do all activity. So if I just go about my day-to-day work, my existence day after day, being simultaneously aware of those things within me that are active and that part of me which is at rest, I will have solved the problem, as Swami Vivekananda calls it. What this will do is that even when I remain rooted in my identity as the Atman, I can be the witness of whatever my body and mind are doing. Just as we are able to oftentimes witness what is happening around us, and because we are able to create a space between ourselves and whatever is that is happening in the world outside, we are able to look at it objectively and form judgments about it. We are not so good at judging ourselves because we are not able to create that space between ourselves and the body and mind, which are the instruments we use in our day-to-day work. The only way we can create some amount of space between our body and mind and ourselves is by affirming our spiritual identity. So the more often I remind myself that I am the spirit, I am this Atman, then it becomes a little bit easier to then look at what my body is doing, what my mind is doing, and when I'm able to look at it in as objectively a way as possible, it becomes easier for me then to make the right choices. It's easier for me then to decide that the body is right now doing this, and this is something good, this is something right, this is something that is helpful. These are the kind of thoughts my mind is thinking now, and these thoughts are good, they are healthy, they'll help me. Or these thoughts are bad, unhealthy, they are weakening, they are disturbing me. But in order for me to observe my body and mind, I need to create space. And that's creating space become possible when I remind myself of my spiritual identity. It's then that I can see that where I attributed action first, thinking that I was doing it, I now see no. I am not the one who was doing things. It is the body and mind that were doing those things. So let's take a look at the next verse, verse number 19. Yasya sarve samarambhaha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni dagdha karmanam tamahu panditam budhaha. Whose undertakings are all devoid of plan and desire for results, and whose actions are burnt by the fire of knowledge, to him the sages call wise. So, actions being kama sankalpa varjitaha, being free from kama and sankalpa. Now, we saw a little bit last week about the role that desire plays in us. And in that context, I said that desires themselves are not a problem, inasmuch as it's the sankalpa. When the will grabs the desire and makes it an intention, then it kind of enters into a dangerous territory if that is going to lead to an action which is not in my interest. And so that is what is meant by saying, kama sankalpa varjitaha. Can I, before I make any sankalpa, can I have at least a little bit of a pause to decide whether or not the present desire that has risen in my heart should be transformed into an intention? Because desires will keep coming. We cannot, just like when you start boiling a pot of water, if you start boiling that water, eventually bubbles are going to spring from the bottom of that vessel. You cannot stop the vessels, or you cannot stop the bubbles. The desires in our heart are all like these bubbles in a boiling pot of water. And the desires spring from the mental impressions, samskaras within us. We may not be able to stop the desires because the samskaras are still there within. Where we do have complete control is which of these desires I can grab and convert them into an intention. That is where we need a little bit of a pause. People who are very impulsive, people who first act and then think, tend to come to grief more often than those who may be a little bit slower, but who pause, who take some amount of time to think that here is this desire in my heart. Should I act upon it or not? Such people may still make mistakes, but such people will tend to make fewer mistakes. And one who knows exactly which desire to act upon and which desire to let go such a person is wise. Look at verse 21. Nirashir yatachittatma tyakta sarva parigraha shariram kevalam karma kurvan apnoti kilbisham. Without hope, the body and mind controlled, and all the possessions relinquished, he does not suffer any evil consequences by doing mere bodily action. So this way, the ideas will continue explaining further the nuances of Karma Yoga. So this was one idea I really wanted to emphasize this morning about being mindful about actions that occur. One other important point to keep in mind is how important are our actions, our work, our accomplishments in the larger scheme of things. I mean, if you look at it this way, how many of the accomplishments of people who have come before us, of the earlier generation of people in history, how many of those accomplishments do any of us remember today? Maybe people who are close students of history might know something more about the things that people have done. But for most of us, the time wipes away everything. Even if you go and build a huge structure, a big building or something like that, and maybe that building is named after you, or there's somewhere something saying that, well, you'd accomplished this. And that might remain, your name might remain for some time. And after some time, if the building collapses or they rebuild and put some other structure in its place, it's gone. So sometimes I think we do hype the importance of work in our life. The work that we do, if that work is done in a way that helps bring about certain transformation within me, that is the only permanent thing that remains. All external achievements are very transient. Sometimes people say, oh, you will be remembered for this thing that you have done. There is a story, I don't know how maybe just an apocryphal story. It seems that someone mentioned to Woody Allen, the filmmaker, that you have made some amazing movies. You have become immortal through your films. And then it seems that Mr. Allen is reported to have said, I don't want to become immortal through my films. I want to become immortal by not dying. So it's no big consolation that I have done this great accomplishment and people are going to remember me after I die. Big deal. I mean, who cares whether they remember me or not? I'm just going to die anyway. So I think it's in Vedanta, what Vedanta points out is that the value of all the work that we do, all the things that we accomplish, if at all something remains permanent as a result of the work that we do, it is the inner change. That is the reason in ancient times, in Vedic times, it was not so much important what you did. What was more important was how you did it. clearly, I mean, it's given that what you do has to be ethical and moral. But as long as it is ethical and moral, it doesn't matter whether you're doing something what is seen in the world as something high and great and noble, or you are doing something which might be seen as menial. Now, these value judgments that we make, that's the weakness of the human mind. And we spoke a couple of maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think, about the caste system, about the way societies organize themselves. And yes, there'll be certain kind of activities in a community. Say there is a priestly work, then there is a work of administration, then there is a work of trade and commerce, and then there is a work of menial labor. There is no reason to think why any of these activities are better or superior to any other. As activities, they are all same. Now, it's our human weakness that we somehow think, oh, this is something more important, something which is high, as opposed to something that is low. Swami Vivekananda deals with it in his Karma Yoga lectures. He says that a person whose job is to mend shoes, and someone who is administering a kingdom, let's say a king, the king and a cobbler, let's say, are different. The two tasks are different. But there is no reason to think that the king is somehow higher or better type of activity than someone who is just mending shoes. The reason is, Swami Vivekananda says, if you ask the cobbler to go and rule a kingdom, that person may not be able to do it. So the cobbler is not fit, may not be fit to rule the kingdom. On the other hand, if you ask the king to go and mend his shoes, the king will not be able to do it. The king is not fit to be able to fix the shoes. So there is something that this person, a cobbler, can do that the king cannot. There is something that the king can do that the cobbler cannot. There is no difference. Now, if that cobbler can do the work in a spirit of Karma Yoga, that cobbler can become enlightened. If the king can do the work in a spirit of Karma Yoga, the king can become enlightened. But a king cannot do a cobbler's work, and a cobbler may not be fit for the king's work. But there is no hierarchy that this work is higher or lower. And because of that way of thinking, what we did was not given as much importance as how we did it. Which is why it was not such a big problem when a community said, you are born into this family, this is the work you have to do. You don't have, your mind may want to do something else, but this is what the community needs. And we discussed this in quite detail last time. So we have to take all these things into consideration, that of course, in life, if we are lucky to get the kind of work that we also like, well, that's great. It's not that we necessarily have to do something that we don't like. So if you're lucky to get it, that's fine. But there may also be situations in life where we may have to do the work which may not be a topmost priority, or it may not be something that or let me put it this way, there may be other kinds of work which might be of greater interest to us than the work that we are saddled with. Now, the option that we have is either to go on complaining and grumbling and feeling frustrated, or the other option is, I'll try to get the kind of work I like, but if I don't get it, whatever work I have to do, I will do it in a spirit of Karma Yoga. Because the goal of my life is not to do this work or that work. The goal of my life is not to go and impress other people. The goal of my life, now, some people's goal may be that, but from a perspective of a Vedanta student, the goal of the life is not doing this or that. The goal of the life is to transform ourselves. If we remember that, then it really doesn't matter what work we have to do. So before I conclude, I'll just narrate to you one incident that occurred in the life of Holy Mother. So the main monastery of the Ramakrishna order at Belur Math had just started, and Holy Mother, who was living in Calcutta, who had come from her village Jairambati, and for some time living in a rented place in Calcutta. So she came to visit the monastery once. And Swami Premananda, a disciple of Ramakrishna, was showing her around. And so when they came near the kitchen, it was in the morning time, and some of the younger novices were there chopping vegetables because it's time for cooking, for preparing for lunch. So they were sitting there, and there's this India, they have they all kind of sit cross-legged on the ground, and they were chopping vegetables. And so Holy Mother came there with Swami Premananda. And Swami Premananda said to Mother, Mother, look at these educated young men. They are very all highly qualified. And all that they do here after joining the monastery is just chop vegetables. And so one of the brahmacharis, one of the novices there, he just made a comment, and Mother was very pleased with that comment. And what this brahmachari said was, he said, the goal of our life is to please the Divine Mother. And that can be done as much by praising, by singing, by writing books, by lectures, by this, or by chopping vegetables. The goal is not the chopping vegetables for that as a goal in itself, nor is the goal of doing some tremendous worldly glorious things to impress people. The goal is to please the divine. And the divine can be pleased even if I'm able to vacuum my room meticulously, properly, keep my own home clean, remembering that this is where the Lord is going to come and stay. If I'm able to do even the smallest of things with the spirit of Karma Yoga as an offering to the divine, in the spirit of selflessness, then that thing will give me enlightenment. And so this is, as those of us who want to practice Karma Yoga, therefore, have to remember not to make these hierarchies in the nature of work. All work is sacred if it is done as an offering to God. If it is not done as an offering to God, even the work that is externally might seem to be sacred become just secular. Think about the pujaris, the temple priests. Now, worshipping in a temple, what could be, one might say, a more sacred duty than that? But if I worship in a temple and I do it with full devotion, then that work can benefit me. But then if I'm a temple priest and if I'm hired there by the management of the temple, and if I see that work as merely another day at the office. I see that work as, well, this helps me to pay my bills. Then even that worship that I do in that temple is a secular activity, because I'm not doing it, that worship as worship, that worship has become work for me. Now what the Gita says, what Krishna is telling us here is, can even a work that might seem as a very secular activity, that can be transformed into worship. That has the ability for me to give enlightenment right now, if I do it in the proper spirit. So that's the first thing to remember in the spirit of Karma Yoga, that not to make any distinction between one work and another. So long as the work is ethical and moral, every work can make me free. And the second thing which we saw here today was to see where the activity is. It's the body and mind that do all the work. I, the spirit, am the witness. And if I can create that space, I will be able to feel that peace, that rest, even when the body and mind are active. So the body and mind can be very active. What makes me tired at the end of the day is that I am identified with the body and mind. That's what's tiring. Now, one would get tired even if one is not identified, because the body and mind are material. They have to follow the laws of matter. So when there is energy depletion in the body and mind, they are going to get exhausted. But that kind of a natural exhaustion of the body and mind is understandable. But we get more exhausted at the end of the day than we need to. And that extra exhaustion that occurs is because of this false or a wrong identification of the Atman with the body and mind. So if I'm able to keep them apart, if I remain aware of my Atman identity, then I will be able to experience peace and rest even when I am busy working. And even when I am busy working, the moment I bring my mind to the Atman, I'll be able to feel that peace. So I can be peaceful and working at the same time. And that, Swami Vivekananda said, is the goal of Vedanta. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhum. So thank you for all the questions. So the first question is, what are some of the practical tips to not get attached to the results of the work? I think we need to understand what it means to not get attached to results. When we do some work, we clearly are expecting some result. There is a saying in Sanskrit, prayojanam anuddishya na mandopi pravartate. That is, every work that is done is meant to accomplish something. So when we start the work, we have the result in mind. Now, having that result in mind is not attachment itself. If I want a certain outcome, and I determine that this is what I need to do to get that outcome, then while I am working, and after I have determined the course of action, I need to focus entirely on the activity. While I am working, if a part of me is thinking about the result, then that is attachment. Because then my entire mind is not being given to the work itself, because a part of the mind is thinking about the result and what would happen if it is successful, what would happen if it fails, what is this person going to say, or what will people think. All these considerations while I am working is actually a distraction. And that is what is meant by saying not get attached to results. The second thing to keep in mind is if we have given our best effort in doing a work and yet it fails, we at least have the satisfaction that I did my best. And of course, later on we need to analyze saying what things I could have done differently. And we learn from that mistake. But doing things differently is different from, oh, I didn't do enough, that I wasted my time. That doesn't give any satisfaction. But sometimes it does happen that you gave your best effort. You couldn't have done better than what you did. And yet, purely due to factors beyond your control, the work still fails. Now, you are going to be disappointed, of course, but you have the satisfaction that I did my best. So the disappointment would be much, much greater if all my mind was focused on the result itself. But that I can take that failure in my stride if my focus was in doing the best work, using the skill and knowledge that I have in the best possible way. It's easy to understand how there is inaction in action. I'm having trouble understanding the opposite, where there is action in inaction. The action in inaction is that the body, the Atman, is not doing anything. Now I'm imputing activity there by saying I am doing it. So what is inactive, what is just there, not doing anything, I'm imputing activity on that which is at rest, eternally at rest. So that is what means seeing action where there is inaction. And in the body and mind, which are really active, I don't see any activity there because that activity I have transferred to the Atman. So therefore, that which is active, I see as inactive. I'm not really saying the body and mind are inactive. All the time, I'm not seeing the activity. And that is what is my implication means. I'm considered them as inactive because if I saw that activity, I would have said that the body and mind are doing it. So it's an implied meaning there. What are the ways to self-assess the quality of how we are doing whatever we choose to do? One way to self-assess whether we are doing the work that we do in a spirit of karma yoga is to see what effect it has on us. If you see, there are often times when you do something good in a selfless way, without calculating what you're going to get out of it, the amount of satisfaction and the lightness and the freedom that work brings, we know we have done something right, done something good. So that's one way of self-assessing, is to see whether my work is making me feel free and good about it. On the other hand, if my work is producing greater stress, greater anxiety, greater worry, greater heaviness, then there's something wrong in the way I'm doing my work. So it's easier to assess the quality of the way we do our work by the effect it has on our lives. The next question is about work and worship. Oftentimes in Vedanta, they say that it usually goes through 3 stages. In the beginning, it is work and worship. And that's what I said in the beginning about this inevitable division we make about our secular work and our spiritual work. So when you are meditating, praying, studying scriptures, you think, that's my spiritual activity. And then the work that you do at the workplace, or you go shopping and all the other things, we see them as a secular work. So this kind of a division, so usually all the work related to spiritual life, we can categorize it as worship, and everything else becomes just work. And as long as we are at the stage of work and worship as two separate things, we'll always have to deal with this dilemma about time and energy. How much time should I give for this? How much time should I give for that? How much of my energy I should expend in this? How much of my energy I should expend in that? So that tension is going to remain. Then the next stage is we say, let me try to do my work itself as a form of worship. And we saw that one way of doing that is, if we believe in a personal God, to do that work as an offering to the divine. That just as we offer flowers and sandal paste in a ritualistic worship, we offer the results of the work itself to God. We actually offer everything, both the work itself, the results of the work, and everything connected with the work to God. So at the end of the day, before going to bed, a karma yogi will say, Lord, whatever I did today, I offer it to you. Then I'm trying to do my work as worship. So just as we offer flowers, we offer work and its results. Now, if I'm able to do it perfectly, if I'm able to do it well, if I'm able to do it with faith and devotion and sincerity, then this work as worship will mature into work is worship. Then this distinction between the two completely disappears. Here's a nice question. Sometimes my boss asks me to choose what task I'd be more interested in. Since I have to reject one kind of work to choose another, I feel like I'm not able to surrender to the work and follow yoga. Now, if your boss is asking you to choose what work you would like to do, why not look upon that also as the will of God? Well, God is present in your boss, so maybe God wants to give you a choice. So if you're given a choice, make use of that opportunity to choose what you would like to do. And you're actually very lucky. Not many bosses ask their people what they'd like to do. So as long as this boss is there and who keeps on making this offer to you, count your blessings and enjoy. And then maybe when you become a boss yourself, if you have enjoyed this experience of your boss giving you the choice, if possible, try to give choice to the people who work under you. Right? Is doing one's duty equal to karma yoga? No. Doing one's duty is doing one's duty. It's not just doing the duty that is karma yoga. It's doing the duty selflessly. In fact, doing the duty, not thinking upon it as a duty, is a higher stage. Because there is something about the word duty. Duty has this kind of flavor attached to that word, which means given a choice, I probably wouldn't do it. What to do? It's my duty. I've got to do. So if there's something I love doing, I don't necessarily say, oh, it's my duty to do it. Well, I just love to do it. So if I find a way to love every work that I have to do, then that would be a much higher way to, and if I can love the work and do it selflessly, then it becomes karma yoga. But merely doing one's duty is not necessarily karma yoga, because people do their duties with great reluctance, sometimes with frustration, sometimes with anger, sometimes haphazardly. So that doesn't become karma yoga. So thank you very much for all your questions, and Have a good week ahead of you. Stay safe, stay healthy wherever you are. While it's May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.